Heather had been the queen of the neighborhood for years, treating the homeowners association like her own little kingdom. She walked around as if she owned the place, using silly rules like weapons against anyone who didn't match her idea of the perfect neighborhood. But despite acting all important, Heather wasn't chosen as leader. She just said she was in charge, and most people avoided fights by going along with her. Then Shaquille moved in, and that changed everything. One day, Shaquille walked to his mailbox, not knowing Heather was watching him like a hawk. The moment he opened it, her voice sliced through the quiet street. "Excuse me, but what do you think you're doing?" Shaquille looked at her, not impressed. "Getting my mail." Heather crossed her arms. "That's funny because I don't remember seeing you at any HOA meetings. Do you even live here?" Shaquille took a deep breath, already knowing where this was going. "I own this house." Heather wasn't happy. "Oh, really? Do you have proof? Because this neighborhood has standards, and we don't need strangers just wandering around looking suspicious." Shaquille sighed. He could have argued, but he had nothing to prove to her. Instead, he turned, walked inside, and shut the door. That was enough to make Heather mad. Minutes later, police cars showed up at Shaquille's home. 3 officers walked up with their hands on their belts. "We got a call about a suspicious person," one said. Shaquille smirked. "Let me guess, Heather." Sure enough, there she was, standing across the street with her arms crossed. The police checked his ID and home ownership papers. Everything was correct. They turned to Heather, clearly annoyed. "Ma'am, he's the legal homeowner. This isn't something for the police." Heather's face turned red, but she insisted. He must be breaking some rule. "Look at his lawn, and his trash cans are out a day early." The officers didn't even bother to reply. They left, and for the first time, Heather had to deal with being embarrassed. But if Shaquille thought that was the end, he was wrong. From that day on, Heather made it her goal to make his life miserable. She patrolled his house every day, looking over his fence, taking pictures, and flooding him with notices. She fined him for made-up violations. His grass was too long by half an inch. His front door wasn't the right shade of blue. His trash bins were ugly. It didn't matter that none of these were real HOA rules. Heather had decided Shaquille wasn't welcome, and she wouldn't stop until he left. Shaquille put up with it for weeks, hoping she'd get bored. But Heather wasn't just nosy, she was obsessed, and eventually she went too far. Shaquille had never been one to start fights, but Heather had crossed all the lines and it was time to fight back. He filed the right papers with the city, got all the approvals he needed, and spent the weekend putting up a 7-foot-tall wooden privacy fence around his backyard. It was sturdy, clean, and totally legal. And to make it even better, he put up a big black and white sign right in the middle. It said, "Private pool, no trespassing." Shaquille didn't really have a pool, but that wasn't the point. He knew Heather couldn't help but stick her nose where it didn't belong, and this was a test. Right on cue the next morning, Heather marched onto his property. Her face was all scrunched up with anger. "Are you kidding me?" she yelled, pointing at the sign. "You can't just put up a fence like this." Shaquille, sipping his coffee on his porch, didn't even look up. "Pretty sure I can," he said. "This is against the rules," she snapped. "I checked the HOA rules." "My property was never part of the HOA," he smiled. "Looks like your rules don't apply to me." Heather's face twitched. For the first time, she seemed unsure. Shaquille noticed it. It was more than just anger, there was fear. She quickly got her cool back, though. "I don't care about your loopholes. This fence looks awful, and that sign you don't even have a pool." "You're lying to everyone," she said. Shaquille stood up and looked her in the eye. "What's it to you, Heather?" That was it. She lost it. "I'm calling the police." Shaquille leaned against his fence, amused. "Yeah? What are you going to tell them? That a black man legally put up a fence on his own land?" Heather pulled out her phone and dialed. "I want an officer here now." Minutes later, a police car pulled up. The same officers from before got out. The moment they saw Shaquille, their faces said it all. "Oh, not this lady again," one sighed. "What's the problem this time?" Heather started ranting. "He's putting up illegal fences, he's hiding something, and there's a sign for a pool he doesn't have." The officers looked at Shaquille. "Sir?" Shaquille shrugged. "Fence is city approved. Here are the permits." He handed them the papers. The officers checked them, nodded, and gave them back. "Everything looks fine here." Heather's mouth fell open. "But it's not right. He's breaking the spirit of the HOA." The officers looked at each other. "Ma'am, he has every right to build a fence. And frankly, you're wasting our time." Shaquille watched as Heather's face twisted. Her anger was clear, but there was still that flicker of fear. And then it hit him. She wasn't just upset because she couldn't control him. She was scared of what he might discover. Shaquille didn't know what it was yet, but one thing was for sure. Heather had a secret. And now it was time to find out what it was. Her fuss about the fence didn't make sense. She had thrown fits over small stuff before, but this was different. There was desperation in her voice. Shaquille couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. So he started looking into it. It all began with his curiosity about HOA rules. If Heather was so strict about him following the rules, he thought he should check them out for himself. He spent an evening reading through the papers, expecting to find some trick she was using. But what he discovered was completely different. His property wasn't part of the HOA at all. His house was built before the HOA even existed. When the association started, new homeowners had to sign papers agreeing to follow the rules. But Shaquille's property was never included. Legally, he didn't have to follow any of Heather's silly rules. Heather had been lying on purpose all this time. That alone made Shaquille very angry. But as he kept searching, things got even more interesting. He looked at old HOA financial records, public documents, and past meeting notes. He wasn't sure what he was looking for until he found it. Heather had been taking money from the HOA for years. It wasn't clear at first. She had hidden her actions well, changing numbers and moving money around. But the pattern was obvious. Hundreds of thousands of dollars had vanished from HOA funds under her watch. And when the money was low, she would increase fines on homeowners to hide it. Shaquille felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just about power. Heather was a cheat. She had been tricking the neighborhood for years, using fake violations and scare tactics to get money out of homeowners. And he had been her latest victim. Now he had proof. And it was time to use it. Shaquille could have confronted Heather directly. He could have gone to her house, shown her the evidence, and told her to stop bothering him. But that wasn't enough. Heather had been controlling and bullying the community for years. If he was going to stop her, it had to be public. It had to embarrass her. And most importantly, it had to be permanent. Step 1. Show everyone her crimes. Shaquille sent an anonymous tip to the city's housing office, attaching all the details about Heather's fake fines. He showed where the money went missing and how she made up violations for homeowners. The city started an investigation right away. Step 2. Make the neighborhood turn against her. Shaquille made copies of the financial records and put them in everyone's mailboxes. People who had been fined unfairly now saw that their money was stolen. Angry, they asked for a special HOA meeting that Heather couldn't control. Step 3. Drive her crazy. While the investigation was happening, Shaquille decided to have some fun. He kept changing his fence. Every week he made a small legal change, like painting it a different color, adding some lights, or making it a bit taller. Every time, Heather would get upset and call the police. Every single time, they found nothing wrong. The officers started rolling their eyes whenever they saw Heather's name on a complaint. Her credibility with law enforcement was completely ruined. Then came the big hit. Shaquille filed a lawsuit against the HOA saying there were fake fines and harassment. The lawsuit made them check the HOA money, and when the numbers didn't match, Heather's secrets were all out in the open. When city investigators knocked on Heather's door, her control was over. The homeowners who used to support her turned against her right away. They wanted her to resign, they reported her to the police, and they shamed her for what she did in public. Heather had tried for years to mess up Shaquille's life, but now she was the one with everything to lose. And Shaquille? He was finally free. Shaquille had been acting like a tyrant in the neighborhood, using the HOA to boss around and punish people she didn't like. But now her control was falling apart and everyone wanted to get back at her. The moment the community got proof of her cheating, anger spread quickly. Homeowners who had to pay unfair fines flooded the HOA with complaints, demanding something be done right away. Heather, who used to be so sure of herself and untouchable, was now on the defensive. At the next emergency HOA meeting, Heather walked in thinking she'd take charge again, but she was met with angry looks. One by one, homeowners stood up and shared their complaints. The single mom who got a fine for leaving a bike on her porch. The old couple who had to repaint their house for no good reason. The veteran who was scared of losing his home over a fake violation. Each story was like another nail in Heather's coffin. Then came the big surprise, the state's fraud investigation. Shaquille's tip had done more than just show Heather up to the HOA. City auditors started looking through HOA records, and what they found was bad. Tens of thousands of dollars were gone. Money that should have gone to neighborhood improvements had disappeared into Heather's pocket. And that wasn't just a problem for the HOA, it was a crime. A state fraud investigation started against her, and soon, Heather's bank accounts were frozen. Her personal things, like her car and savings, were taken to pay back the HOA money she stole. Desperate, Heather tried to blame others, but no one was listening anymore. The people who once feared her now saw her true colors. She was a cheat, a liar, and a bully. Heather had to resign in shame, but karma wasn't finished with her. When everyone learned how much she had stolen, she was sued by many homeowners for the trouble and money problems she caused. She lost every case. Then came the last hit, her house. With no money left and legal bills piling up, Heather couldn't pay her mortgage anymore. In a twist of fate, the same system she used to scare others, HOA fines and foreclosures, came back to ruin her. Heather lost everything, no money, no power, no way to control anyone ever again. With Heather gone, the HOA had to fix the mess she left behind. They got rid of the fake fines on homeowners, and all the money she took was put back into the community fund. But Shaquille? He wasn't finished yet. He had spent months dealing with Heather's bullying, and now that she was out of the way, he wanted to make sure it never happened again. So when Heather's house was up for auction after she lost it, Shaquille did something surprising. He bought it. The very house Heather had ruled from, the one she used to scare and control her neighbors. Now it belonged to the guy she had tried to ruin. But Shaquille had no plans to live there. Instead, he made it into a rental home for families who don't make a lot of money, making sure that people Heather would have looked down on now had a nice, affordable place to live. The end was like a storybook scene. As Shaquille walked around the neighborhood, past his private pool or the no trespassing sign, he saw his old neighbors waving at him. Not with fear, but with respect. He had won. And Heather? She was gone, left to deal with the results of her own meanness. Justice was done. If you like this story, share it with your friends and family and subscribe to the channel for more stories.